Hey there folks, how are you? Here we are, episode 7 already. Who thunk we could hang in there doing this on a weekly basis, but not only am I keeping up with the videos, I'm also keeping up with my practice, which has really got me excited. Now this week we're going to do a little bit of an interlude. We're not going to stop practicing, obviously, and we know that right now we're focusing the majority of our practice around, or I am, around minor pentatonic, and learning all of those shapes and getting them fully ingrained into our minds. And last week we did a bunch of exercises for the shape 2 of minor pentatonic. Look at episode 6 and see what we did for shape 2. Just repeat those things for shape 5. This week, like I said, it's a bit of an interlude. Instead of playing with these things, our tools of the trade, we're going to talk about something interesting, something that I've often wondered and spent a lot of time thinking about. We're going to talk about what makes a guitar player an intermediate player. All right, the first thing that I think about for intermediate, right, is first off, people, and lots of people are going to say this anyway, but like, why label yourself, blah, blah, blah. Well, the truth of the matter is, I'm not labeling myself. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to have goals, right? And my goal is to be an advanced or even beyond advanced player. So in order for me to do that, right, don't I sort of have to define what that is? Well, I don't think I'm ready to define what an advanced player is. But I think I am ready to define what an intermediate player is, especially as I've been spending the last almost 2 months really focusing in, honing in on my skills and figuring out what things to do. Malcolm Gladwell has an awesome book called The Outliers. I highly recommend checking that book out if you haven't already. But you may know the premise in there, and the basic premise is that in order for a person to be an expert, if you will, at anything, you need to put 10,000 hours in. Here's what I think an intermediate guitar player needs. First things first, you've got to be able to play 5 songs from beginning to end without stopping, just play the song. So that's the first thing. And by the way, I can check that one off. And I'll tell you why. Because I'm in a band. And the only thing that makes up a band is the fact that they can play songs. The next thing would be, let's talk about the ear for a minute. So I believe that you should be able to discern between a major and a minor chord. Hopefully, most of us already can do that. But this is a very important part. Our ear is a huge part of the guitar, especially like at an advanced level. And so I believe that by the time we're intermediate, we should already kind of be dabbling in those areas. And along those lines of hearing, I would say that hearing and discerning intervals is really important too. I don't want to throw all the intervals into the basket of being an intermediate guitarist, but I think sometime during your time, by the way, we're going to be intermediate for a while, right? It takes a while to get to advanced, but sometime during our intermediate playing and practicing, we will know all the intervals by ear. And by the way, if you don't know what I mean by that, then you definitely need to know that as well. But so I would throw out that we need to know the difference between like a minor second and a major second, and also the difference between a minor third and a major third, and maybe perfect fourth and perfect fifth. How's that? So we cover some of them, we cover some that are pretty easy. And I'm not talking about just knowing what they are, like only a half step apart or a whole and a half step apart or something like that. I'm talking about knowing the difference with your ear. And I'm talking about harmonically and melodically. And that's pretty much as far as I'm going to go with the ear, is knowing that the difference between a minor and a major chord, and also knowing a few intervals. Now there's plenty of other stuff that we should be doing, and I absolutely go out there and start looking at ear training, because as an intermediate guitarist, a lot of the stuff that we're going to start really throwing into our bag is based on intervals and ear training. So let's not stop there, but let's say that's a minimum to be an intermediate player. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. Scales. This is a tough one for me. And as I was planning this thing out, I was like kind of fighting myself about a bunch of different things. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say minor pentatonic, major scale, the Ionian mode, and also the natural minor, Aeolian, right? The sixth of the major scale. you need to know all of those. How do you like that? I just threw that out there and it's like, holy crap, that's a lot of scales to know. Maybe to some of you that's like nothing and you already know them. Great. But then maybe some of you who are watching this are already intermediate guitarists. I'm going to suggest that to be an intermediate player, you must know all 4 of those. Now here's the caveat. Here's the part where I'm going to go a little bit easy on you and easy on myself. You only got to know one shape. But I'm going to throw a little bit of a wrecking ball into it. At least for one of them, I think you should know all 5 positions. Guess what? We already know, 7 weeks into this program, we already know the 5 shapes of minor pentatonic, right? So all you have to know is one shape of, by the way, major pentatonic is minor pentatonic. So technically you already know that one. You just have to know where on the fretboard you are as opposed to being in the minor position. But we'll talk about that soon. So you already know that one too, which is cool. We're like halfway there. So really all you need to know is one position of the major scale, and I happen to already know that, and then one position of the minor scale. With the minor scale, I need some work on that one. So I'm still kind of trying to tackle that one, but I'm going to throw some work in on that so that I can call myself intermediate. I'm so excited about this. All right, there's another thing that we need to know. I believe as intermediate players, we should know not the entire fretboard, because we are definitely heading in that direction. And I believe that as an intermediate player, we will already know the entire fretboard. I'm sitting here, look, I got my imaginary fretboard, you know, this thing. But here's the thing. You got to know all of the note names on the first 2 strings, on the low 2 strings, right? E and A, which would also give you the high E. But there's a method to my madness. You have to know E and A because pretty much all of the bar chords and the power chords that we're going to play in our lifetime, for that matter, are going to utilize a root note or a deep note, a low note on the E and A string. So if we know all of those note names, there's sort of a bit of a magic trick associated there. Once we get good at bar chords, I'm already pretty decent at bar chords. I grew up on power chords, so I'm pretty good at not only moving to them quickly, but also just knowing where they are and everything. But I believe you need to know all those note names, because then we can make any chord. You guys knew this one was coming, so let's go ahead and tackle it. Chords. Now the big question is, what chords do we need to know, right? We need to be able to play all of the natural chords, right? ABC, all the way through G, every single chord. Major, minor, and 7, I think, are a given, right? And when I say 7, I'm talking about the dominant 7, right? Dominant 7 is a 1, 3, 5 flat 7. Look that one up too. And those are a given. You must know all of the chords in major, in minor, and in 7 chord. And most of us already do. I feel like that's kind of a beginner thing anyway. As you're wrapping up being a beginner, you will know all of the chords in all 3 of those qualities. But then there's a couple that we're going to add into that, because I want to make intermediate just a little bit tougher for myself. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add minor 7 and major 7 into that same category. And you may have to look up what those how those chords are made up, because we're not going to have that discussion because I can't tell you. Actually, I think I can. 1 flat 3 5 flat 7 is a minor 7, and 1 3 5 7 is a major 7. I may have that right, I may not, because I'm not intermediate yet, right? So I've got my out. But I believe that, like, we should know a minor 7 flat 5, you know, the half diminished chord. I believe that we should know augmented chords, diminished chords, diminished 7th chords. I believe that we should know sus2, sus4, 11th, 9th, all these different things. But I feel like we're getting further into the deeper parts of intermediate, and maybe even into advanced, depending on how you look at it. But we definitely want 5 categories of chords: the major, the minor, the dominant 7, the minor 7, and the major 7. 5 categories, and we have 7 natural notes, right? So 7 times 5, 35. Here's the cool thing. B and F, remember we said those are bar chords? So you don't have to memorize those ones. Because if you know an E in all 5 of those types, or an A in all 5 of those types, then you can play an F and a B by just doing a bar chord and moving it up. So I just gave you an easy way out of knowing 10 of the chords that we have to know. You automatically already know them if you know the E form and the A form of those. Isn't that cool? I just took you down from 35 to 25. I just made our lives easier. This is cool, right? All right. This is the last thing, I promise. The last thing is timing. The thing that separates, for me, the biggest thing that separates a beginning guitarist to an intermediate guitarist is actually having a full grasp of timing. And the easiest way for me to demonstrate, not demonstrate, I'm not touching the guitars, but the easiest way for me to kind of demonstrate that for myself is through the use of a metronome. And just knowing either in chords or in scales or the chromatic scale, the real chromatic scale as we discussed in a previous lesson, just being able to play those, for instance, with the metronome and doing quarter beats for chord changes and strumming patterns, and then doing 1/8 notes for strumming patterns and or scales. And then here's the tough one. To make you intermediate, you got to be able to do 16th notes. Okay, so I'm talking 16th notes for your strum pattern, right? 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. So you gotta be able to do 16th note strum patterns and also your scales and your chromatic scale and anything else that you can think of. I think that separates you from a beginner. Being able to do that kind of timing and stay with it and stay in it, you know what I mean? Because it can get kind of complicated when you're doing a strum pattern at a 16th note time pattern. Do that and do all of those things and you'll be an intermediate player. Now, in all sincerity, please comment below and tell me what your thoughts are on the things that I mentioned and what you think maybe should have been added or shouldn't have been in there. And then let's have a discussion about it. Anyway, thanks for hanging with me for this episode. I'll see you in the next journey entry. All right, take it easy.